Sasha, thank you. Before I start, when I announced the lineup of speakers of the Vadis, which we've been doing for 4 years now in conjunction with MoneyWeb, and I said part of my lineup is Magda Wieseka, I got a couple of phone calls from people saying, how the hell did you do that? She was the hottest personality on the speaker circuit in South Africa at the moment. And I said, it's quite simple. I followed my old joke that I always tell people. I say, how do you get the date with the prettiest girl in town? You ask her. Well, that's what I did. I got on an email and I wrote explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it. And I think within 30 minutes, I got an email back saying, I'm in. So Magda, I want to thank you very much. I know you're extremely busy, giving up a lot of your personal time. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And it was, again, riveting to listen to you. But the same to my other speakers, Glyn Owen, all the way from London, who's been, being part of Brentis' offering for quite some time, and is very humble in many respects. He's Brentis Global Balance Fund. It's one of our biggest holdings offshore. It's one of the very few global balance funds, and many of you in this audience have money in that fund, that has actually beaten the index over the last 2 to 3 years, which is quite commendable considering the volatility in markets. And the announcement of this new global ETF equity fund, which I think is the first in South Africa, low cost, passive. The active part comes in by the asset allocation calls that will be made by Glyn and his team. So we're very excited about that as well. Glyn, thank you very much. And Glyn knows I'm going to tell you people, but apart from being a fund manager, he's also a very, very capable sheep farmer. And his lamb was served at the Queen's Jubilee Festival 3 years ago. So there you have it. For your sheep farmers in the audience, get a couple of tips how to do it. And then to JP Fiscal, thank you, JP. That was very, we haven't met until recently, but I've been following you on TV. And I mean, here's a guy who shorted African Bank and made a gazillion rand and shorted Steinhoff. So we're going to be asking him some questions just now. But let me not waffle on. I'm going to be trying and be as brief as I possibly can, considering where we are, markets, land reform, politics. And South Africa is always a volatile country and has been for many years. And I recall buying my first ever house as a young student, believe it or not, in 1976, June 1976. And as I was signing the papers for a little house close to Rao, you could see the flames and the clouds going up not too far away from where I was buying my house. In fact, it was the best time to buy a house for many, many years. So we live in an interesting country in many respects. Now, the last thank is to my team, my wife, Sue, and Leanne, who puts together this Vadis seminars. And it's like the Springbok Centre. When you go through a gap and you know you can pass left or right, there's going to be somebody there. They're not going to drop the ball. And these two ladies in particular have done amazing stuff. Thank you very much, ladies. I appreciate that. But let's talk about, which button do I push? This one. The green one. Oh, there we go. We're talking about, and I've spent some time, and here and there you've heard comments, rumors about the damage done to the South African economy by the disastrous rule of Jacob Zuma and the ANC over the last 10 or so years. But I don't think people fully, truly appreciate the damage that he has done to all of us, to our wealth, to our asset values. He's been doing to us for the last 10 years what he has been doing to his 7 wives for the last 20 or 30 years. You can decide what he has been doing. It's been 10 years of wealth destruction of significant length. Let me just run through a couple of the indicators. Economic growth, 2008, 2009, we all know about the financial crash. We're one of the very few countries that have not recovered from that catastrophic crash. In fact, the growth, and Magda spoke about it, not creating jobs, has been quite a disaster. And we've missed an economic upturn, currently a global economic upturn. We've actually missed that with all the benefits that come with an economic upturn in the terms of trade, job creation, etc., etc. Let's talk about wealth per capita. South Africa, way down, absolutely no growth in per capita in dollar terms, whereas the rest of the emerging markets have gone up and the rest of the world gone up quite substantially. On a purchasing power parity, you'll see our wealth in international terms has been dropping and dropping quite significantly. And you can see that in many, many economic indicators. You just got to go and look for them. I found another one yesterday when we got the news that the foreigners or the foreign travelers to South Africa has dropped by, I think, 7% or something, which is a bad number by itself. But then I looked at the percentage of people leaving the country to go and visit other countries on holiday. That's dropped by 15%. It's just another factor how poor we're getting. And I'll get to the reasons why less and less people can afford to go on holidays, because it has become very, very expensive. And you see it in other economic indicators. Motor car sales 10 years ago, I mean, the industry was talking about reaching 1 million motor cars per year. We are down to 420,000 cars, and the guys are quite happy to get 420,000. So let's move on with the rand, of course. Can you believe 10 years ago, I took some money out of the country, I paid R6.84. Still remember that. And people said to me, are you crazy? You cannot pay so much for the dollar. Went to 17 for a day and down to current levels. So over time, that is what's happened under the regime of Jacob Zuma. Let's be fair. Not all his fault. There were other factors. The economic cycle turned quite viciously downwards, followed by the downturn in the commodity cycle. South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, is still a mining country. What happens in mining, commodities, impacts on what we produce and sell offshore. Let's look at our credit rating. Our credit rating for most of the Mandela years, then Thabo Mbeki was going up, very nice upgrades. The peak of our investment grade rating was 208, 209. But since then, and here one can point the fingers directly at economic mismanagement by Zuma and Pravin Gordhan. I've been criticized for having a go at Pravin Gordhan, but much of this happened under Pravin Gordhan. The downgrades, the expenditure overruns, and the composition of our expenditure, more importantly. So, and since then, it's just been a disaster. We are now officially junk by two of the three big ones, and we're hanging on by our fingernails from the third one. So it's been a bit of a junk downgrades in many respects. And these things are important, ladies and gentlemen. Government wages. This is something that's now back in the front pages. We had under Trevor Manuel, who did a great job in many respects, got government expenditure, government wages under control. But when Zuma took over, you can see this absolute acceleration of government wages, which are totally out of control. They still are. The announcement 2 weeks ago of the increase of, I don't know what the percentage is, 7, 8, 9%. The total of 30 billion rand has not been budgeted for. It's a scary number. There's a 30 billion rand hole already developed in government expenditure. And I'll give you an example. In Pravin Gordhan's own office today, the DA asked a question, or maybe I should have put it up here. They published a list of what people in his office earns, and it's not his fault, it was the previous minister who appointed them all have the same surnames, by the way, and come from the same tribe. But grade 9 qualification, his personal secretary earns 897,000 rand a year. The head of the office has got a diploma, 1.1 million rand a year. The lowest paid worker in his office is the lady that they call who makes the tea or brings the food, earns 284,000 rand per year. Now, which private sector company can afford those kind of wages? 2 days ago, there was an article on Business Tech about the barman in Parliament being paid 25,000 rand a month. And they did a comparison with what the private sector pays for barmen, bar ladies was 5,000 rand. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we're talking about. And I'm not even referring to the whole Eskom debacle. So government debt has gone out of control over 10 years under the Zuma regime. It's just a single steady line, and every single report that you read from Moody's, Fitch, and those people point at this. So this has to come down. It's out of control. So it's somewhere around about 53% now, and for the analysts, they're looking for that number. The bad number there is 55, I've been told, by the economic analysts who are prepared to speak their mind. And there's a comment, this is not the kind of talk that you will hear from, and with all due respect to my friends, economists that I play golf with, or used to play golf with, and nowadays drink tea, they privately will tell you what they feel and which way the economy is going. They cannot do that in public. It's a career-limiting thing to do. We've had many examples of economists sticking out their neck, commenting on government or government actions or policies, and the next minute you get the chop. Chris Hart, as a result of a tweet, got the chop. My old friend Nico Tsipionka, fired by Standard Bank many years ago, and there are a number of examples. The big asset management companies have to toe the line. You will never see a presentation like that from any of those guys. Being independent, being a owner-managed company, we don't have big bosses telling us what to do and what to say, which is a very nice space to be in. This is a scary chart, ladies and gentlemen, published by Mike Sushler. It basically says how much money is coming into the country minus what's going out of the country, or vice versa. And it's either a positive or a negative. And since 2010, you'll see more money was being invested in this country than what has left the country. Since then, and this is mostly corporates, big corporates, and private individuals, wealthy private individuals, who've taken the gap, and currently there is more foreign fixed investment outside of South Africa by a substantial margin. I think the number is 1.3 trillion rand that has been invested from foreigners into this country. Mike Sushler went a little bit further, and he worked out and he said, if you price a job at 1 million rand per person, this represents a loss of 2 million jobs to South Africa. And the question, of course, why did this money leave the country? Now, that's open to debate, but it's many issues, but policy uncertainty, most definitely. The attack on mineral rights, most definitely. Anti-business attitude of government, most definitely. And I think, this is just my personal opinion, expropriation without compensation, if handled badly, there's always a caveat, if handled badly, can lead to further acceleration of this with severe adverse consequences. One hopes that the government gets a handle on this whole thing. As Magda says, I think Cyril was pushed into a corner. There was a rumble in the jungle, and he had to attack the EFF and come out with a policy that was not clearly thought out. And you can see it in the information that's coming out now. How much land are we talking about? What kind of land? Is it farmland, urban land? There's just so many factors. But handled badly, this can accelerate the flight of capital out of South Africa, rand weakness, and possibly a reintroduction of foreign exchange controls. Budget deficit, going to run through a couple of boring statistics just to really put you to sleep, but can you believe 10 years ago, the budget deficit was 1%. I mean, with the economy being growing at 5% for the last 2 years, money was pouring into the country. We were heading for a Soccer World Cup. It really was the golden period for South Africa, and jobs were being created. And since then, of course, you had 2008, 2009. That collapsed like elsewhere in the world. But since then, since 2013, 2014, when the severity of the economic downturn, the commodity cycle hit us, our budget deficit has actually stayed the same. That red you can find in the budget forecast beginning of this year, and I'll bet that it's going to be out of line. I think it's going to be wrong, especially when you count the cost of wages, the additional costs of all the things that are being promised. That's not been budgeted for, so there's a good chance that number will be wrong again. But again, a dismal pattern for 10 years under Zuma. Debt servicing costs, second item on our budget. Our World Competitive Index, we've been slipping very badly. That line is, the higher it goes, the less competitive we become or are. We have been overtaken in African terms by Mauritius many, many years ago. And of course, countries like Rwanda and Morocco and those places have overtaken us in terms of competitiveness. And this is what the world is looking at when the emissaries are heading out, or the missionaries, shall I call them, who are going to go and talk to foreign capital. Please invest money in South Africa. They're very much aware of these facts. They've got their people on the ground, and they ask all these kind of questions. Why are you slipping and slipping so badly? What has the impact been on your wealth? Far worse than you expect, because a lot of it is not mentioned, it's not spoken. You get a little information in Twitter kind of style feed, but when you look and stand back, and like Jean-Pierre, I spend a lot of time analyzing stuff that I shouldn't be analyzing. The property market collapse, or the property market stagnation, has impacted, and I consider that a very big factor in the private wealth of many people, with the exception of the Western Cape. But it's coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. It's coming your way. In many northern parts of the country, property prices have come to a standstill, are declining in nominal terms. They have been declining in real terms. This is in real terms. The average property price in South Africa today, and averages are averages, is now around about the level of 2005. It hasn't gone up in 13 years. I did a quick number while I was sitting there. I had a look at, just to draw a comparison, at the peak of our property boom 2008 when the rand was 650, compare that to the average price of a house in the United States, and again, it's just an average. You could buy 85%, with the average price of a house in South Africa, you could buy 85% of a house in the United States. Today, you can buy 42%. Because of a decline in real terms of our prices, whereas property prices in the United States have gone up fairly substantially over that period of time. So property, for most people, except those who are lucky or smart enough to buy in the Cape waterfront, or places like Val de Vie, where the nice people give you a Ferrari when you buy one, property prices have been fairly dismal. 10 years ago, I made a joke the other day, 10 years ago, all talk at dinner parties were, next new development, how many bonds you're getting, where you're buying, what you're buying, let's form clubs, let's go buy to let, let's go crazy. And as much as we try to warn people, these things end in tears. People didn't listen. Well, the topic is still property 10 years later. This time around up north, it's, have you sold your house yet? Is your tenant paying? Has the sheriff been there? It's far worse than you know, ladies and gentlemen. I have very good friends, including myself. I'm sitting with one or two properties in a beautiful part of town, Dainfin Golf Estate. Can I sell it? No. My rent today is the same as 5 years ago, not a cent higher. The minute you tell the tenant we're pushing up the rent, he says, goodbye, the house next door's open. Boom. So it's quite a serious matter. I might be joking about it, but it's affecting a lot of people. Just a further indication of how property prices have, or property market activity has declined over the last 10 years, and there's a combination of economic factors for that, but it's really at zero or very close to zero in many, many, many respects. This is a scary chart. You haven't seen it yet. If you look at the growth in the average bonded, remember when you buy and sell a property and there's a bond on it, they measure them, they count them, and they can say whether it's going up or going down. Good times goes up. Everybody talks about come and get your bonds and buy property. It's been on a decline for a while. Third quarter of last year went up very nicely. And property guys were starting to see a bit of a recovery in the property market in general terms. The last 4 months, absolutely collapsed. It's telling me, if you find a good journalist can scratch, that the expropriation without compensation has just slammed on the brakes of the property market. That number is the first sign that it's happening. It's -7. It's equivalent to the collapse of the great crash over there. That's just the various regions. As you all know, Western Cape was an outlier for many, many years. Did extremely well in Western Cape for many reasons. Semigration from the north, better managed towns and cities, and that has slowed down in the last quarter. Still positive, but the good times for the meanwhile are certainly over. Partly two. Simple equation. I always joke that the cure for high prices is high prices. I think the Cape Town developers have priced themselves out of the market when the Gautengers land here, having sold their magnificent property for 20 or maybe 22,000 rand a square meter, and they have to fork out 50, 60 or 70,000 rand a square meter. That's when the reality hits home, how much property you can buy here as opposed to what you can get up north. The second factor what I picked up, there's been a slight swing in the semigration from south to the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal, where property prices are significantly cheaper. You can buy beautiful villas on the beach, flats, apartments at 25,000 rand a square meter. You cannot buy that in Western Cape. That just by the by. So let's just look at South Africa as an investment destination. We have fallen off the map. This is what Magda was referring to last year. Of all the emerging market countries, there was one country that had a negative number in South Africa. That's not a great chart to show you, but these are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to run through, we're running out of time. The unemployment, Magda spoke about that. That is a big, big number, and we're seeing the manifestations of this high unemployment in our roads today. Seems to be the new tactic. Try and create the biggest chaos on our main roads, close to the toll roads, where the trucks have to slow down, and you can loot and burn the trucks. At the moment, the government really doesn't seem to be handling it very well. Just to threaten that we will take action and you will feel the full brunt of the law. It's not scaring off the people. On Monday in Pretoria, a lot of our guests could not reach our destination. The road between OR Tambo and Pretoria was closed. Did any of you read about it? The road was closed. There were trucks being burned. I think the media has become very tired reporting about these things. Let's move on. I've had a lot of criticism for saying what I say. Even my good friend Ryk van Niekerk, who can't be here today, so I can say it. I didn't say it up north because he was standing next to me, but I can. He had a go at me. I said 4 years ago, as long as Jacob Zuma is in power, I cannot make out a case for investing more money in our South African stock market. And unfortunately, I was proven right. And we'll see it, how this is translated into the relative investment returns for the last 3 years. We the blue ones, the red one is emerging markets, green is foreign markets, developed markets. Over 3, 5, 7, and 10, the investment returns in South Africa were stone lost. Not in 1 year did we manage to beat either the emerging markets or the developed markets. Here is JSE versus the world in over a 3-year period. The only one, well, we got very close. Over 3 years we lost. Over 5 years annualized. I mean, we've been growing at 10% per year. A lot of people seem to think that's okay. The S&P 500 has been growing at 20% per year. It's been double. And this goes on for 7 and up to 10 years. Even on a 1-year basis, the only country that's lagging a little bit is Europe, which has got its own problems right now. But over 1, 3, and 5, our stock market has been stone last or second to last when you compare it against. And these are the facts, and I have to react to facts. And Jean-Pierre referred to the reluctance among certain people not to take money offshore, saying, oh, it's risky. On the contrary, we the risky part of global investing. Let me just finish off 2 last charts. You've seen that one. It is going to go onto our website. Same story. Doesn't matter, dollars, rands. We are stone last. And yet, just a very nice graphic selecting the world, S&P 500 and us. You can see we're chugging along around about there. The rest of the world is creating a lot of wealth for their investors. Our pension funds, as a result of Regulation 28, forcing most South Africans to invest in pension funds that is not proving to even beat inflation. Over 3 years, our average pension fund, well, I did a quick number, whether it's high, medium, or low equity exposure, has not beaten the inflation rate. Has your pension fund told you why? It's a government directive. You have to invest at least 75% in the South African market. So just by the by, so you're losing money on the property market and your pension fund, so you'll understand why people are feeling under a bit of pressure. My last or second to last chart, we still, every time we switch on the radio today, yesterday, last week, last year, 30 years ago, the first thing the radio announcer says is, and the gold price is. It is the least significant economic indicator, but yet old habits die hard, and we still think in terms of gold being an asset class that's going to protect you. That's just a very quick comparison with gold as an investment over 5 years. You lost 15% of your money. If you invested in the Franklin Biotech, which a lot of you have in this audience, up 137%, and the pure technology stocks, this is the FANGs, they have created great wealth for their investors, and by and large, most average South African investors in this country have missed that wealth creation offshore. My favorite fund right now, and this was, and I truly mean it, before I met Magnus, when I read about the Fourth Industrial Revolution Fund, I said, that's the fund I like. Just come back from the United States, been to Google, Facebook, Microsoft, I spoke to these people, and I realized we are missing the trend. Those people are creating enormous wealth for their shareholders and for the country. When I saw that there's a fund called the Fourth Industrial Revolution Fund, I said, that's for me. It's a new fund, we're putting money into it over a short period of time. That was a week ago. It's up about 40% now. That's double the return of the JCE. That's how investors need to start thinking about investments. To summarize, before we have the question and answers, 2 months ago, my wife and I were down at Valdeville. We have a little place, and the talk of the town was the rain, or the lack of it, water, or the lack of it. Things can change, ladies and gentlemen. Today, it's pretty beautiful. There's been great rains. The mood is lifted. But one needs to know that it remains a risk. The same with investments. The big risk is that the government gets it horribly wrong, and we as individual investors have to pay the price. And nobody's going to come and support you when your funds go down or don't grow or like they should grow. So the message is be realistic, but try and think globally if you still want to remain in South Africa, because your traditional assets in South Africa, your gold, your property, and even your pension funds are not beating the inflation rate. And with that, thank you very much for attending. Now we're going to go to our question and answer session. Baie dankie, dames en here. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'd like to start the question and answer by asking Jean-Pierre how he discovered the Steinhoff scam, fraud, whatever. Just tell us, just take us through that. That intrigues me as a journalist.
I think this mic should be working. Yes. Okay. So I'll grab a seat and then I'll tell the Steinhoff story. So there were always some small signs with Steinhoff. It was always a bit of a different company than the rest on the JSE. Every year the annual report had a different strategy. Every year there was an acquisition, but a bigger acquisition. Every year there were pro forma numbers. And every year when they had their results presentation, it was held in Wynberg. Now, unfortunately, not the Cape Townian Wynberg, the one in Johannesburg, which is on the wrong side of the highway to the Alexandra side rather than this Sandton side of the M1. And there were always police present. And should I use this one? Is this for the webcast? Oh, okay. No, sorry. I think I'm fine. Am I okay with this? Should I use this?
No, you're fine.
No. I think there's a webcast as well, so I should use perhaps both. Anyway, so there's always these signs. When you go into the results presentation, it's a publicly listed company. And most companies, if it's publicly listed, anyone can attend the results presentation. With Steinhoff, they had people at the door that would stop you if you were not on the invite list. If you do get through, in the very first row, it was only bankers. The most senior bankers of all the banks were there with Steinhoff, which showed where the interests were. It wasn't shareholders and the company being run for shareholders. The bankers were looking for the next big deal and supporting Steinhoff in that way. And there were questions about Marcus Jooste as a person as well. So fast forward when some of these allegations came out, specifically the allegations in the German media, I decided to dig a bit deeper. And I went to the Swiss and Austrian equivalent websites of our CIPC, Companies Intellectual Property Commission, where you can go and you can see what companies have been registered, what are the assets and liabilities, what holdings they have in other companies, who are the people involved, who are the directors. And I came across all these off-balance sheet entities with directors linked to Steinhoff, but assets and liabilities apparently not consolidated by Steinhoff, which really alarmed me. So what did I do? I phoned up the company and I said, I want to talk to you guys. So I flew down for one day to Stellenbosch and sat in front of the executives and asked them, what is all this that I found? Public information. And they had very good answers. I was actually there with two of my colleagues of Fairtree Capital, and post that meeting, the one decided not to sell, the other one did sell, and I decided to go even more short than what I was. But they had very good answers. They were very charismatic. So this was September. So 2-3 months later, everything came out. The share price fell. But that is the story behind it, how I sort of found this kind of thing.
It's interesting that you talk about annual general meetings. The other company that wouldn't let non-shareholders in was JD Group.
Ah, there you go.
Like begets like. But let's put this over to the floor. And is there anybody who has a question for our panel? This is your time. So please, go ahead.
JP, that would imply the other directors was aware of the offshore, off-balance sheet entities and transactions.
So that's an interesting one.
Do you want to repeat that just for the webcast
Yes,
guys?
sorry. So the question is, does what I say that one could get this information publicly, does that mean that the directors of Steinhoff's board were also aware of this? Now, if I put my other hat on as a board member of Capitec, I must say that directors mostly keep their reading with whatever is in the board packs. And most directors, unfortunately, don't go other than that to other sources of information to see what else is out there. So I cannot speak to exactly what each director obviously knew. What I can say is I can understand that if they were the type of directors who only read what was in the board pack and listened to what Marcus told them, they would not know about the off-balance sheet entities. But the information was there, it was publicly available.
Magnus, you raised a little flag about Pravin Gordon, and you said the deficit went down, went bigger under him. He's now not fearing being fired. Is he now doing a good job? Bearing in mind he's also a communist. Can you expand
The comments, if you look at the budget under Pravin Gordon, I mean, he was in charge of many, many budgets over that period of time, and there were a couple of characteristics of the budget. I actually did spend some time going through it. I compared the forecasts in the budget in terms of growth, revenue, GDP growth, and compared it subsequent 6 or 8 months later, or even a year later. In most cases, the forecasts were wrong. that they were too optimistic every year. And in fact, it became a sales job when you would get up in Parliament and saying A, B, C, and D. And then 6 months later, when the public is busy watching Seven Alarm or whatever they watch, it just doesn't ring a bell. So he's been very consistent, and under his guidance, our total wages is ballooned. And he has to take the blame for that. He's not in charge of finance right now. But what is very concerning is that how he capitulated in the Eskom saga last week, when the newly appointed CEO said, no salary raises for you guys, we just can't afford it. And Praveen knows this. He knows how big the hole in the Eskom balance sheets are and everything. And he pulls the rug and he says, we're going to tear up that agreement, and now we're going to negotiate. And today, driving here, I heard Eskom wants like a 9 or 10% salary increase. You know, this is just, it's not the kind of stuff we need to be doing to sort this mess. It's like kicking the can down the road for as long as we can, because remember, 14 months from now, there's another election coming up. But at some stage, Eskom will blow up. And the taxpayers, the rapidly reducing number of taxpayers, will pay the price.
Sorry. Maybe let me step up in the defense of Praveen, because I find him to be one of the most honorable people I have ever had the honor to meet in my life. I don't think Praveen is a communist. He's an activist. He is absolutely passionate about South Africa. He is absolutely passionate about bringing all the crooks to book, and he's pursuing that relentlessly across all the SOEs. But, he has inherited an incredibly difficult job. It was the most difficult portfolio that, when he was a Minister of Finance, one of his problems was that as much as he tried to rein in the wage bill, Zuma didn't listen to him. And so, the municipalities and government departments just increased wages with impunity. So he had budgets, and then no one complied. But, right now, what has he done? He has replaced the boards of all the state-owned enterprises. He is looking in a great deal of detail at the balance sheets of all those entities. And look, the reality of the situation right now is that if our state-owned enterprises were private companies, they are all bankrupt. The shareholders actually have no say in them, and those companies should right now be run by banks and debt holders or bondholders. So, you're sitting in an incredibly difficult position. Now, his decision on Eskom was a pragmatic one. Unfortunately, what, he had to weigh up is the fact that we've got no money and Eskom is bankrupt, against the negative headlines of South Africa has no water, no electricity either. So we were literally being held to ransom by unionized labor. They cut off power in Johannesburg, they caused havoc in Johannesburg. We would have had more blackouts. We would have had more negative headlines in the international media. And I think the decision he took under huge duress was a pragmatic one of weighing up that against the fact that, yes, Eskom is bankrupt and, it has double the workforce that it should. And unfortunately, I think we will see more of these pragmatic decisions that possibly don't seem rational, but you actually have to put yourself in the position of people like Praveen, like Cyril, and say, what would I do under the circumstances? I don't envy them their jobs. But one thing I can tell you about Praveen is that he is hugely, hugely motivated. And he's not a young man, hugely motivated to get South Africa's economy and going again and to repair this country from the damage it has suffered. I feel honored to have met him.
When I think of...
Magnus, sorry, please, can you just elaborate, talking about Eskom, I did not hear Pravin or anybody say the top management of Eskom is going to reduce their bonuses or reduce their staff. It's only the workers that were not going to get a pay rise. So, sorry, you're not.
Okay,
Pravin,
so let me, I was privy to a conversation with the new chairman of Eskom, Jabba, and he said that, the remuneration that the new directors of Eskom are receiving is so teeny tiny that he's had to explain to his wife why, for the first time ever, he cannot provide for his family, and he has to dedicate so much of his personal time towards fixing an entity where actually, people have been appointed to the board on the back of trust rather than necessarily competence, because that's effectively what is happening right now. People are being appointed to these positions on the back of trust, and they're doing a service to the country. So none of those board level remunerations are at any, market-related level. When it comes to the remuneration of executives, if someone offered you the job, and you mentioned earlier that you did some work with Eskom in your, previous years, if someone offered you the job of being the CEO of Eskom right now, how much money would you demand to take on that job? A suggestion was made that the boards of state-owned enterprises should actually be staffed by people who are retired and who are prepared to do it as a service to the country, and clearly so, because that is actually what's required. So I think that no wage increase applied across board, but those very senior positions which have to be staffed by very competent people, I almost feel you have to bribe them to take on those jobs, because I wouldn't.
Anyone else? Otherwise, please go ahead.
Look, he has, from the statistics, and from what I've been told, he's got, about 55% support in the ANC against 45%, which isn't necessarily, Jacob Zuma supporters. They're just people who kind of participated in the state capture project. I have this core belief that, the only way forward, but it's a hugely problematic political way forward, is to have a period of amnesty where you effectively offer anyone who benefited to the tune of, say, 5 million rand, a complete amnesty, blanket amnesty, where, if they come, kind of give an affidavit, their names are kept off any registers, and there are no consequences. And that would very quickly, I think, swing, the balance of power towards Cyril, simply because people who are right now living in fear of prosecutions and potential prosecutions and consequences are not so much leaning towards Zuma, but are, fearful of the current political regime. Now, if you look at Zuma, what I found absolutely hilarious and support for Zuma was when they organized the night vigil on the eve of his appearance in court, and 10 people pitched up. They hired a stadium, and literally there were 10 people and journalists. So I think he, as a figure, has slim chance of, really achieving anything now. However, that doesn't mean that state capture is over. It doesn't mean that people who, are not going to cling onto power that shouldn't be in various positions. Brazil introduced that amnesty, and that is one of the reasons we have seen these prosecutions happen, and why Brazil, is in the process of a cleanup, and it has worked very successfully there. However, we are heading into a period of elections, and I think, and it's my personal opinion that, ANC is fearful that, offering this blanket amnesty would suddenly put huge spotlight on the corruption within the ANC itself. Because suddenly you would have, thousands of people coming forward saying, I benefited. At the same time, the private sector, which participated in the same project, is not being held to account. I think they won't go with the suggestion of this blanket amnesty, but I think that blanket amnesty could possibly shore up Cyril's support. But he is growing stronger every day. I mean, I think it's step by step. They're getting rid of people they need to get rid of, step by step. If there's one other party in this which could help enormously, and that would be the Constitutional Court, if they started making their rulings sooner and quicker, as opposed to, dragging their feet. So the Constitutional Court needs to come to the party here and start prioritizing certain cases and certain rulings, because that would, enable Cyril to move faster on certain positions, such as, Sean Abrahams, for instance.
I've got one question, and I've been meaning to ask this question for 3 events now. We owe so much to somebody or a group of people who are responsible for the Gupta leaks. Who do you think that is or might be? Have you got a view on that, Magda? It intrigues me.
Can
Someone
I take a fifth?
leaked those tapes. As you know, I just drool as a journalist. Who could that be? Who do you think it is?
I can't answer that question.
My guess is that there are still some good people inside the state security apparatus, and that they leaked those. But that's speculation. But I still think there are some very good people in our government.
Okay, I'm not going to answer that question, but for the protection of the people involved,
Fair enough.
there are some good people in South Africa. All I can tell you is that Gupta leaks were not stolen. Gupta leaks happened because of the stupidity of the Guptas. So that's the only tidbit I'll leave you with. And hence they can be used as evidence in a court of law. Every single one of those emails can be used as evidence in a court of law. But, and time will come when the whole story can be told. The time is not now, and that's for the protection of the individuals concerned.
Do we have time for any more questions?
One more question,
Go ahead. Yes.
To what extent, I don't even ask you that, but what role does the auditing profession play in the whole state capture and what's currently happening?
Okay, so without besmirching every, hardworking CA, I think the major problem with the audit profession and with various firms, and by the way, there are no clean players. Yes, KPMG was, the worst of the lot, and there was a UK ruling of a couple of days ago which was just scathing of KPMG. The major problem with those big audit firms has been the fact that they commingle the provision of 2 types of services. On one hand, they do audits, and on the other hand, they provide advisory work. And there's no restriction on being, providing both to the same company. So on one hand, they audit a company for some fixed fee. On the other hand, they provide you with advice on tax shelters. And that advisory work carries a much higher fee than the audit work. So if you are appointed to do both, you are unlikely to want to lose your advisory appointment by virtue of potentially pointing out issues on the audit side. The way they defend themselves, and this is what the biggest problem I have with the audit profession and the way that the auditing standards work right now is that the auditors, have huge amount of disclaimers in terms of the financials that they prepare. And the first disclaimer is that they completely rely on the information provided to them by management. So they take no responsibility whatsoever, despite charging multi-million rand fees, for the accuracy of the information, if the information provided to them by management is incorrect, false, etc. They specifically exclude fraud from the audit. So they claim and state so that they do not audit for fraud. That would cost too much money and take up too much time. Now, if that indeed is the nature of an audit, then one needs to question what is the value of audited financial statements. Why should companies spend millions of rands on audits if they are worth as much as, I can put together consolidated reports, financial statements of the Signia Group, release them, and you can have as much confidence in those numbers as you have in the numbers which have, Deloitte or somebody else signing on them. Because there's a huge disclaimer at the bottom of it which says all that information is information provided to them by management. So I think the audit profession, look, did they participate in the state capture project? Of course they did. But, so did other companies. So let's, there were numerous companies that participated. Naspers, another one. So numerous companies, South African and international, that participated. And, the auditors, look, I think there is a huge shake-up of the audit profession that's coming. Because there is this realization which has happened, not only because of what has happened in South Africa, it's what has happened internationally, what has happened in terms of Steinhoff and Deloitte, so there will be a complete relook at the value add and the, and the way they actually perform their services. And I think, a positive first step would be for that to be a complete separation of advisory work and audit work. So you can accept one of the two, but you can't accept both from the same company. And I think that would, kind of help enormously. But yes, they participated, just like the private sector participated.
Right, on that note, ladies and gents, the panel will be with us. Please stay around and have a drink and a snack with us. And if you've got any more questions, then these lovely people will be here to answer them.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Thank you very much for coming and to the panel once again, Magda, Jean-Pierre, and of course, Glenn. But to all of you clients and non-clients of Brentis, I'm extremely proud of our company. As you well know, for another week or two, we're still the top boutique wealth manager of the year, which we're very proud of. And as you well know, we've got 3 offices in the Cape now, and we've got our 2 range of international funds. We've got 3 local funds. We try to do things very differently, but we are only in business because of our clients. And if we don't add value to their lives, we don't have a business. So we have to say to you, thank you very much for coming here. Join us for a drink, and good night.